Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Emma Goldblatt, and I'm the program director at Uri Topolosky. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know about a couple of upcoming classes. On December 3rd, we have the Shabbat Effect, a book talk with Alan Marinis. And on December 11th, we have Workers' Rights and Paying on Time with Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. So we hope that you'll join us for those. You can sign up for either of them at the link tree, which will be in the description of wherever you are watching or listening to this. But today's class is the Holy Blasphemer in Leviticus 24, a story of justice and injustice and how the Torah seems to respond to itself, modeling for our sages how to respond to injustice in the future. We are joined by Rabbi Uri Topolosky, who is the spiritual leader of Kehilat Pardes, the Rock Creek Synagogue, and Rockville, MD. He also serves as Rav HaKehillah of the Berman Hebrew Academy. He's married to Dahlia, and they are proud parents of Elyon, Itai, Adi, and Liat. So welcome, Rabbi Uri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you for organizing everything. Thank you for welcoming me and pronouncing all of my children's wives and my names correctly. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm blessed to share this little humble teaching today and put it out into the blogosphere and the universe. This is a favorite teaching of mine and perfect for today. Because if I'm going to write a book one day, which, who knows? I can't quite write books like the great Rav Shmuley, but if I write a book one day, it's going to be about minor Jewish holidays that nobody celebrates. And so today is a minor Jewish holiday that nobody celebrates. It's actually one of the newest modern holidays on record, established by the Knesset in Israel. It's Ben Gurion Day. This week marks the yahrzeit of David Ben Gurion, and it's a national holiday in Israel that's being observed today in America, um, in which we celebrate the life and the vision of David Ben Gurion. And so it's a minor Jewish holiday, or at least a minor Israeli holiday that for me makes it a minor Jewish holiday. I'm wearing a little sticker, and everybody should take a minute and think about David Ben Gurion today. Um, but actually, I think a lot about minor Jewish holidays, and today, as I'm thinking about Ben Gurion Day, it reminds me that yesterday was another minor Jewish holiday that nobody celebrates. There's a debate in the Midrash about what was the day that Noach exited the Teva after the flood, the biblical flood. When did that happen on the calendar? And what is the particular dates? And there is a debate in our tradition that's recorded by the sages that basically places the dates at two different times, 6 months apart. So one of the dates that it all lines up with came out yesterday as the day that Noach finally exited the Teva, the ark, after such a long period of time when the floodwaters had receded. There's a debate about that, but let's just take it that we've got two minor Jewish holidays 2 days in a row. But yesterday's holiday is really powerful. And you think about this moment of Noach walking out of the Teva and God saying one of the most radical things God could say. When Hashem promises Noach that Hashem will not do something anymore, God promises to self-limit when there's no expectation or requirement for God to do so. God says, that rainbow, that's my promise, the Brit, that I will never again bring such a flood on the earth. It's a remarkable moment. God is promising to self-limit, to pull back, to be mitzamtzem, to not do as much or go as far as God could. And it seems because God chooses to in this moment. So that is what we in some ways celebrate yesterday on this minor holiday, in which we recognize that if God is pulling back, there is an expectation that humanity must step forward. That brit, that shared covenant is there because there is a hope, a prayer, an expectation, an obligation to rise to the challenge of creating a more just and moral world as we are created, manifest in the image of God. This is everything that Uri Tzedek stands for, and that everything that Rav Shmuley stands for in the holy work that he does. And it's the work that we all need to be doing, a work of holy justice and righteousness in the world. So that's my setup. Minor Jewish holidays, and one in particular from yesterday that brings us into this moment. And so on that note, I just wanted to share a brief teaching about one story in the Torah that for me has so many layers and is worth studying again and again and again to understand the layers that are emergent from the text. And that's the story, what I like to call the Holy Blasphemer, the Mikalel. It comes in Vayikra, in Parshat Emor, in the 24th chapter of the book of Leviticus. And it is a story of justice and injustice. And I think a story about how the Torah seems to respond to itself, and a model for how Chazal, our sages, are meant to respond to injustice in the future. So we're not going to unpack every aspect of the story, but I do want to lean into a couple of pieces of it with you. And so I'll share screen a little bit so we can look at the text together, but not the whole time, and try to jump to a couple of different pieces for us to appreciate. So um, here we have Safaria's depiction of Vayikra Chaf Daled, Leviticus 24. And in this simple chapter, we are learning about aspects of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the desert. And right off the bat, it reminds us of the Ner Tamid, which is interesting in and of itself. What was the eternal lamp? Not like the lamps that we have in our synagogues today, but something else, maybe perhaps part of the menorah. And then after mentioning the lamps that had to be kindled in the Mishkan, in verse 5 in chapter 24, we're told the following: "V'lakachta solet v'afita ota 12 chalot." You're going to take flour and you're going to bake it to the Kohanim into 12 loaves. Shnei esronim yah chala echat. There's a certain amount of measurements, exact, precise, that have to be for each loaf. They're identical. V'samto otam shtayim ma'arachot shesh ma'arachet ala shulchan tahor lifnei Hashem. And then they're placed on this table, this shulchan that goes into the tabernacle, into the Mishkan, in two rows, six on top of each other. And it's this symbol that stands in the Mishkan. Eventually, the Kohen gets to eat the bread. But in many ways, for the week, it's a symbolic scene, a symbolic picture that the Kohen is meant to see, to observe, to witness while the Kohen works. And there's a lot of reasons for perhaps why there is such a table that is not obviously mentioned in the text. Um, but that's, one understanding here that we have, that the table is maybe represents 12 tribes, maybe represents the Kohen's ability to hold all of Am Yisrael in his heart as he performs the service and to be thinking about all of the people. That's a good question. But let's leave that for a moment. I just wanted to give us what we often think about as smichut parshiot, a juxtaposition of text, And before we move to the text that I really want to teach, I just wanted to show you what comes right before it. So, right after this text that we read about the Shulchan is randomly placed in the Chumash in the Torah a story. And the story is in verse 10 now. Remember, we started the Shulchan in verse 5, so just it's 5 verses of about the table, and now we're telling a story. And the story is of the Holy Blasphemer, the Mikalel, the one who curses. ויצא ben isha ישראלית והוא ben ish mitzri betoch bnei Israel. A Somebody went out, a son. That's all we're told. We don't know his name. Turns out that his mother was a Yisraelite, and his father was an ish mitzri, an Egyptian man. Betoch bnei Israel. This man goes out amongst Israel. Vayinatzu b'machaneh, but he's fighting. Vayinatzu, it's the root word for matzah, actually. Vayinatzu, they're fighting. He's somehow fighting in the camp. Ben ha-Yisraelit ve'ish ha-Yisraeli. And he's fighting this one whose mother is Jewish, but his father is Egyptian, and with some other Israelite. Again, we don't know what they're fighting about. That's all we're told. Vayikov ben Aisha Yisraelit at Hashem. And in that moment, this young man somehow becomes overwhelmed with frustration, rage, anger, disappointment. It's unclear. And he takes the name of God and curses. Vaykalel. Hence, he is called in rabbinic literature the Mikalel, the one who curses. Or, as I like to say, the Holy Blasphemer. Vayavi oto el Moshe. And the people seize him, somebody seizes him, and brings him to Moshe. V'shem imo. And now we're randomly told, oh, by the way, his mother's name, Shlomit bat Divri Lamatedan. Shlomit. It's like, wow, all of a sudden I'm told this woman's name, Shlomit. Not always we get the women's names in the Torah. Not always we get the mother's name. And what a beautiful name, Shlomit. Shalom, peace. It's like almost the opposite of the story. And we're also told that she's from the tribe of Dan. And also Bat Divri. Maybe we'll get to that another time. And what happens? Vayinichu b'mishmar lifrosh lem al pi Hashem. And he's placed this Mekalel into mishmar, very uncommon in the Torah, right? He's placed into custody, into prison, behind bars, so to speak, to inquire of Hashem. What should we do with this guy? Which is kind of odd, right? What do you do with a Mekalel, somebody who curses the name of God? And remember, it's potentially one of the big 10, right? Should be obvious what to do, but it doesn't seem so obvious. And I'll just run through the rest of the story for the moment. So by Deber Hashem or Moshe Lemor, Hashem says, Hotzet Mekalel mechutz lamachaneh, right? Take out this Mekalel outside the camp. V'samchu kol hashamim et yidayim al rasho. Everybody should place their hands who's heard him. V'ragmu oto kol eda. And the congregation should stone him. Vel bnei Yisrael tedaber lemor ish yikalel lokav v'nasacheto. Right? And now a reminder that you cannot do this. V'nokev shem Hashem ot yumat. You'll be put to death. Ragom yigmu bo kol eda. You'll be stoned. Kager ezrach v'nakbo shem yumat. So there's a couple explanations here about the rules of law, what happens when you curse, when you kill, when you hurt somebody. And then importantly in verse 20, shever tachat shever, if you also take a limb, it's a limb for a limb, ayin tachat ayin, eye for an eye, shein tachat shein, tooth for a tooth, kasher yiten mum ba'adam ken yiten bo. Right? So as you're wounded, so as you wound, you shall be wounded. And then and then in the final verse of the chapter, verse 23, it's actually the last pasuk of the parsha. Vayidaber Moshe el bnei Israel. Moshe speaks to Israel. Vayotziu otam hakalel mechutz hamachaneh. They take him out. Vayirgmu oto even. They stone him with stones. Ubnei Israel asu kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. And the people did as God commanded to Moshe. Okay, so it seems like it's a full story that's complete from beginning to end, but there's so many gaps. And in those gaps comes the rabbis to interpret this text, to open it up for us, to make us wonder, to question. and to make this story one of the most powerful and important stories of justice, I think, in all of the Torah. So remember where we started. We started with somebody who's really interesting. He has a Jewish mother and an Egyptian father. Just full stop, everybody. The Torah is describing somebody. Is this an intermarriage? Why don't we know his name? We know the mother's name, but not the father's name. What's happening in the text? There's so much to say here, and the Midrashim offer a lot of color. I want to jump to just one interpretation that emerges from the different rabbinic interpretations, which perhaps suggests when you think about the phrase in intertextuality of Ish Mitzri, the Egyptian man, right? This man is described as having the Egyptian man as his father. There is another place in our tradition where we learn about an Ish Mitzri. So if you have to ask yourself, where is the other place where we learn famously in the Torah about the Ish Mitzri? And the answer that is often given is, oh, I know the Ish Mitzri. That's the one where Moshe looks out from the palace. Moshe looks out and he sees that an Ish Mitzri is beating an Israelite slave, an Israelite servant. And when he sees this, it changes everything for Moshe. And I just want to show you the text so that you see it with me and see where it takes you. So I'm going to bring us to Shmot, to Exodus, um, and we'll look at the story when Moshe emerges onto the scene after having um, seen this Ish Mitzri. So let me just pull it up here. Vayhi bayamim ahem. And it was in those days Moshe grew up. Remember, he's in the palace, having been brought in by Bat Paro from the Nile. Vayigdal Moshe grows up, vayetzel el achav. And somehow he knows that the people that are slaves that are working out there, those are his brethren. Vayar besivlotam, and he sees them in their suffering. Vayar ish mitzri, and he sees an Egyptian man, makeh ish ivri me'achav, hitting a Hebrew from amongst his brethren. And we know what happens. Vayifen kol v'chol, Moshe looks this way and that way. No one's going to do anything. Vayar ki ein ish, there is no justice, there is no man. Vayachet Mitzri, he strikes the Egyptian. Vayitbeneu b'chol, and he buries him in the sand. Rav Sajagon, by the way, says it was an accident. That it's not that he killed the Egyptian, he hit the Egyptian and he happened to die. This actually, by the way, I think is what the Prince of Egypt, the animated film, decided to do. Moshe's not so deliberate to kill the guy like Rashi believes, but he knocked him off the scaffolding or he hit him in such a way that it killed him. But either way, now come back to our story. Who is the Ish Mitzri? Who is this person? Remember our text, if you look back at it now. The Ish Mitzri, maybe one interpretation is that it was the same Ish Mitzri who had raped an Israelite woman, whose husband came in from the field to discover the crime, who ran out to the taskmaster to take him to task for violating his wife, who then gets beaten so severely by that Ish Mitzri, who then Moshe sees and comes and exacts justice in that moment. The Ish Mitzri is dead. It could be that the Israelite woman is traumatized. It could be that the father or the husband, the Hebrew husband, is also beaten so severely he exits the story. And what is left? What's left, according to one strain of interpretation, is a young man, a child, born out of this terrible coming together. It's not even the right phrase. I'm sorry. A child born out of rape who maybe has to hide that fact, whose mother maybe tries to give him every bit that she can, despite the trauma she has encountered, whose father maybe, whose husband, who's not the father, maybe isn't even in the picture anymore, and who the biological father, the Ish Mitzri, is dead and buried in the sand, that Moshe knows. Can you imagine just if you put some of that together, what it would be like to grow up as this boy? Just hold that for a second. And one of the facts that the rabbis say is to note that we're told that he's from the tribe of Dan, not the boy, the mother, right? In verse 11, why is Shlomit told that she's from the tribe of Dan? We don't care. In the Torah, your tribal lineage comes from your father. Why is it relevant to tell us that she's from the tribe of Dan? And now you get a sense. Well, what if this child, says Rashi, what if this child says, hey, my father's Egyptian, I don't get a tribe. So I want to sleep in the area, I want to have my tent as I grow up in the area of my mother's tribe, the tribe of Dan. That's where I get my Israelite from. And they're making fun of him. He's fighting in the camp. People are telling him, you're an outsider, you don't belong. And he appeals, says the Midrash, to the Beit Din of Moshe. And he says, I want you to rule, Moshe. And Moshe, who knows the story maybe this Mekalel says to Moshe, you are the one actually who took my father's life. Not that he calls him my father. You know everything, Moshe. Rule in my favor. Let me pitch my tent in the tribe of Dan. And the Midrash says Moshe rules against him, that he cannot be in the tribe of Dan, that he has to live outside of the camp. And in that moment, Vayikov ben Isha Yisraelit et Hashem. He curses this Torah. He curses this God. He curses its leaders, the Torah, God's appointed leaders. And for that, he is punished. That's one way to read the backstory of this text. Maybe it tells us why Moshe didn't know what to do. I have to put him in prison, make sure, am I really supposed to kill him? Because it's such a tragic and awful story, and yet he does violate a terrible, terrible thing in cursing God's name. It also tells me something else. Remember this one little line when God says to Moshe what the punishment should be? The text said, "Vayidaber Hashem Moshe, hotzeh et hamakallel chutz hamachaneh." I want you to take him out, but I want you to do something very unique. Samchu kol hashomim et yidayim orsho. Everybody put your hands on him, and then you'll stone him. Why? Why does everybody have to put their hands on the accused, on the condemned? It's like too close for comfort. It feels very odd, very uncomfortable. And maybe that's actually what it is. Maybe the criminal has must face their punishment, maybe. But is the community also not responsible for this crime? Has the community not been there to care for this child? Has the community not done what it needs to be done to make sure that this unnamed, he has no name, has a name, has a place, has a tent, has a home? Coded in this story, I think, is a question about how we treat the outsider, how we treat someone that doesn't perfectly fit our boxes. I love that at the end of the text, when it's going through all the rules, it reminds us, oh, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, limb for a limb. You know what the Gemara says in Baba Kama? The Gemara in Baba Kama and Pei Gimel says, the rabbis say, no, 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 we would never take an eye for an eye in the Talmud. The Talmud says, no, that's not what the Torah meant. It meant a monetary punishment. And that's what it always meant. Here you see the rabbis interpreting or understanding the interpretation of the Torah as always being not an eye for an eye, literally. What about a life for a life? There is no other way to understand this story, no other way for Moshe and the people to adjudicate justice in this situation. I don't know, but I think God telling Moshe and the people to put your hands on him is about maybe you're not guilty, but maybe you're responsible. And we all collectively have to feel the responsibility of a young man who goes astray because the community has not been there to support him. There's a lot more to say, but it brings up a lot for me. And, on a totally, a couple different places that I go in my own head, um, I wrote many years ago a blog piece about it's entitled On Being a Jewish Stranger. You can just Google it. It's a blog on Times of Israel on being a Jewish stranger. And I wrote about my own story. I'm a child convert, and what it's like to grow up as a convert in the community. In many ways, I'm not a classic convert. I didn't convert myself, except taking a certain decision at my bar mitzvah. But in other ways, I feel aligned and connected to a group of people that have chosen Judaism, not a choosing people, but a choosing people. And sometimes that feels a little different. Sometimes there are things said that are not always so nice, or assumptions made that are not always so comfortable. And how we think about those that are choosing to be a part of our communities. Even, by the way, today, I was blessed to be a part of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah's summer kollel for Psak, a program that they run each summer to invite musmachim, rabbis in the field, to come and study for the summer and write a piece, a tshuva, a responsa on a question. And the question that I researched was um, about non-Jewish membership in synagogues. Are we allowed to have those who are not Jewish become members of our synagogue? And again, if you Google YCT Kollel for Psak, you can see the website of the different chuvot that have been written in these summer kollels. And I thought a lot about the fact that every Shabbat in my synagogue, we have people in shul who are not Jewish, who are there because maybe they're pursuing conversion, or maybe they're not, but their spouse is Jewish and they're there to support them. Or maybe there's a simcha and a celebration, and we have people who are there because they are part of the family or friends. Or maybe there are people from the neighborhood that want to understand a synagogue and the Jewish community in which they are neighbors. And what do we do to make those feel welcome or not always fit the box or not always in the main majority of the community? These are just two examples of things that I think about, let alone all of the other ways in which we stand before Hashem in community different. I like to think about the Amidah, our prayer that we say 3 times a day. It opens with the line that comes really right after this story that we were looking at. It comes from Moshe at the burning bush. Moshe at the burning bush, God introduces God's self to Moshe. And in this moment, I'll share the text and I'm going to end with this. And if there are any questions or thoughts, you take it further. But Moshe at the burning bush turns away. He's afraid to look. And Hashem calls out, Vayomer, Moshe, Moshe, Vayomer Hineni says, I'm here. And Hashem says famously, first thing God ever said to Moshe, take off your shoes. So if you don't feel comfortable with shoes, it's understandable. I was just in Azerbaijan visiting the Jewish community there, a majority Muslim country, an incredible relationship between the Jews and the Muslims and just the whole country. And the shuls have these beautiful rugs. It's a big culture of rugs in Azerbaijan. And everybody takes their shoes off when you walk into shul. You can't walk on those rugs with your shoes. There's big signs on the doors of the shul, please take off your shoes. Um, but here's the pasuk, Vayomer Anochi, and God says, you know who I am? God introduces God's self to Moshe. Elokei Avicha, I'm the God of your forefathers. Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. That line right here, which comes right after the text I was showing you before of Moshe and the Ish Mitzri, this is how we start every Amidah. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. And I think the rabbis wanted you to take 3 steps backwards, like your shoes coming off, 3 steps forwards into the prayer, and imagine that you are standing at the burning bush, Hashem introducing God's self to you in that conversation. Okay, we're not Moshe, but still we can be in conversation. And by the way, maybe we are being invited to stand in Moshe's feet. And if we were, if I could say humbly, we would be standing in the feet of someone who just took the life of an Ish Mitzri, who just married out of the community to Tzipporah, who is on the run, a stranger, an outsider, a refugee, a shepherd. That is a very different kind of depiction of someone that is maybe just like some of us. A much more inclusive picture of who becomes the prophet. Now, obviously, there's more to the story of Moshe and why he merits this. But I think the Torah also wants to invite you to feel connected to this moment. And that's why they put it as the beginning of the Amidah. So I think in all of this, if we come back to where we started, yesterday, the holiday of Noach exiting the Teva, the first example maybe of Hashem openly declaring a statement of pulling back. I'm not going to do something anymore, maybe to make room for you and I. And you know what happens, which I think is so important, is that when this story ends in the Torah, a new story begins. And that is chapter 25. 25 is Hashem says to Moshe, Bahar Sinai, almost like, go back to the mountain. You forgot something, or we need to learn something. Daber el bnei Yisrael martem ki tavo el haaretz, when you come to the land, we have to figure out a system to take care of all of those Ben Ish Mitzris, Ben Ish Isha Yisraelites, all of those outsiders, all of those that don't fit the box, all of those that are going to need to gather from your field in that 7th year. Let the fields lay fallow. And in Parshat Bahar, the next Parsha, it's almost as if the Torah responds to itself. There is a phrase that repeats over and over again, and that is the phrase, V'chi yamuch achicha. If your brother becomes poor, if your brother becomes downtrodden, here's a system of laws that we can create to build a society that takes care of those types of people. So I just want to end there and invite us to think about what it means to create story of justice in our communities, the story that the Holy Blasphemer, in his tragic moment, is crying out to us to consider, and how I think Chazal, even in the ways in which they look at so much of Torah, are urging us to do the same and make sure that even if we're not guilty of something that has fallen by the wayside or fallen through a crack, but maybe we should feel responsible to bring the justice that our world needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Uri, for joining us and teaching us today. If anyone wants to find out how to sign up for our future classes, the link will be wherever this is posted. Just wanted to thank you all again for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.